this year. Okay, let's get into the budget. Some people say, ooh, I don't want to hear about budget, I want to talk about issues. It's the same thing. The budget is a mirror. And when you look into that mirror, when the governor looks into the mirror, and when the legislature looks into the mirror, the reflection that comes back really is all their priorities. What they care about, what they don't care about, what they want to invest in, what they want to invest your tax dollars in. It's all of the state general fund budget. That is really the best way of analyzing the pluses and the minuses of a governor and a state legislature. This year, unlike the recessionary years that we've had, the battle is over the limited amount of new money available for spending as opposed to cutting. We finally, after many years of pain, have a bit of a surplus. Not a lot, but a bit of a surplus. And so that will be the major disagreement between the governor's recommended budget and that it came out just a week ago today, so this is all very fresh, and the legislative desires, and how they compromise and move together on that will determine how long the session goes and what kind of budget comes out. Let me just give you, I won't give you a lot of, try not to give you too many numbers, but let me just remind you what has happened during this recession that hopefully we are slowly but surely coming out of. In fiscal year 2008, that was the last budget before the economy crashed and the recession started. The state general fund budget was $10.2 billion, that's with a B, $10.2 billion, 2008 fiscal year budget. In 2011, it was $8.3 billion. So you can see that there was $2 billion in cuts that took place because of the lack of revenue. Now granted, some of the legislators, the more conservative right-wing legislators, they enjoyed making those cuts. They definitely have the theory that government shouldn't be in certain businesses that they're in, and it was important to drain the swamp of government. So they used that opportunity and sort of enjoyed it. But the overwhelming majority of legislators, Republicans and Democrats, and governors, whether it was Napolitano who left just as the recession was beginning, don't get me started with that. I was on her transition team, I voted for her, but I was very disappointed when she did not fulfill her final term and when she went to Washington. Anyway, and Governor Brewer, they did not enjoy making those cuts. In 2012, it was then $8.5 billion. In 2013, $8.7 billion. This current fiscal year, which is 2014, and it goes to June 30th, so we're just more than halfway of the current fiscal year, the budget is $8.8 billion. The budget that the governor is recommending that would begin July 1, which is called the fiscal year 15 budget, it is proposed to be 9.36. You want to round it off, people are calling it, the media is saying $9.4 billion. So you can see it's coming back, but still not 10.2, which was back in 2008. What got us through the recession with a bit less pain was frankly the Obama stimulus packages. We got a good $1 billion a year during the recessionary times, and through the governor's leadership and recommendation, they put on the ballot that 1-cent sales tax, that emergency sales tax, which lasted 3 years. That was another $1 billion a year. So that helped make up the differences to keep it as painless as possible. But that sales tax is gone now. That went away in May of last year. And certainly the stimulus money is gone now. So any type of backfilling or creative math that's being used to keep us going as we try to get back to that $10 billion figure, that's really all our responsibility now at the state level. When you look at the state budget, 93% of it is just in 5 areas. And I should have access and DHS, Department of Health Services, healthcare. K through 12 is 44% of the general fund budget. Access and DHS is 21% of the state budget. Corrections is 11%. Higher education is 9%. And the Department of Economic Security, the social service safety net, is 8%. Those numbers should add up to 93. And so all of the rest of state government and our financing of debt, bonding and so forth that we do a lot of, that's only 7% of the total budget. So this is where the action is, and that's where I'm going to concentrate my comments from a budgetary perspective. Now, I'm going to go through the next few charts very quickly because they're simply wish lists in each of these areas. And it doesn't do much good to go into details because the governor's recommendation has come out, and I told you it was a conservative budget, maybe more conservative than was expected by some. So most of the stuff on the wish lists are not in the budget. And if they're not in the governor's budget, they're probably not going to make it because the legislature, the Republican leadership, is going to try to reduce some of the governor's budget to come to a final budget deal. But let's look at what was looked at, a realistic wish list for K through 12 inflation funding. This current fiscal year, inflation funding was put in for the first time, $83 million back into K through 12. The only reason it happened is because of a court order. Folks like Tim Hogan of the Center for Law and the Public Interest and some educators went to court and said, wait a minute, back in the Jane Hull administration, the voters passed Prop 301, and part of that, which was an education proposition, said that K through 12 funding has to automatically be increased due to inflation. The base does. Well, during the recession, none of that happened because they didn't have the money and they needed it elsewhere, and they just didn't fund any of the inflation and looked the other way. Well, they got nailed in court and they had to do $83 million. And in the governor's budget this year, there's another $70 million. The next fiscal year's proposed budget, there is $70 million for inflation, so they're going to do that. That should be the end of the issue. It's not. Tim Hogan and the educators have gone back to the same court and said, wait a minute, you ruled that the legislature violated the vote of the people. Not only do we want it now, we want it retroactively for those several years that they didn't fund it. Well, if the courts go along with that, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of inflation since 2008 that would have to be paid back. I don't know where they would get that money, frankly. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and that's not factored in to any of the budget discussions now. K through 12 wanted as much replacement funding as they could get their hands on, cuts that have been made over the recessionary year. Capital needs, they wanted performance pay, the governor was interested in, technical education funding. The computer system at the Department of Education is horrific. It's old, it's outdated, as most of state government's computer systems are. And it's very difficult for the school districts to coordinate data with the Department of Education and amongst each other, so they wanted money for that. Public school districts are creating more charter schools, which increase their costs somewhat. They wanted funding for that. So this was the wish list. Access. This agency is fascinating because normally because of enrollment growth, the Medicaid system, indigent health care, they normally have an increase in their budget every year. But because of Obamacare money and the 9-to-1 match of federal funds to state monies, it was said this last session that this would help the overall general fund because access would not need an increase. Well, it's turned out that way. They are not asking for more money, and in fact, it's actually $18 million savings to the state general fund in the governor's recommended budget. You can see what's expected by the Accountable Care Act, or Obamacare, coming to Arizona. They expect 150, these are conservative numbers, by the way, 150,000 new enrollees in the calendar year 2014, and then 100,000 in 2015. You know, with that horrible sluggish start, the website problems to Obamacare, during October to December, there were 30,000 new enrollees in our Medicaid system in access. even with that going on. So these numbers are probably gonna be hit. A lot of these are childless adults that were booted off Medicaid. Now they can get back on. The whole point, let's face it, of Obamacare is to get people enrolled in healthcare insurance and reduce the number of uninsured. And a major part of that here in Arizona will be getting people back on, or new people coming into our Medicaid system. Higher education, they wanted some performance pay, some parity, state financial aid. The medical school always has a few wishes. Community colleges doesn't get much from the general fund because they have their own tax, their property taxes. Their local community colleges do. That's where they get like 98% of their money. But the big item that the 3 universities and the Board of Regents asked for was a huge research initiative to upgrade research laboratories. And they want the state general fund to pay $78 million a year for 25 years to do this. This was their huge initiative. Governor Brewer's budget that just came out a week ago today gave them nada. So we'll get into what she gave. But there was the wishes. Department of Economic Security, this was their wish list, which the governor's office, by the way, had bought off on. They went public with it in early October, before the 6,500 not investigated disaster became known. That this is what they wanted. And I put the 6,000, it was 6,500. What happens now to their money? Well, we know what happened because we got a governor's recommendation, which we'll get into. I want to stress the third bullet down. Not one new penny was the Department of Economic Security, because this is what the governor wanted them to do. They did not ask for one new penny of prevention money, which is just amazing. That was the first thing that was cut during the recession, where a lot of wonderful programs were reduced to just peanuts, like Healthy Families and so forth, where you go in and help single parents or parents that have maybe their first child from a low-income, uneducated background, and you go in and you help train them, and you help them with employment needs, you help them how to take care of a baby and so forth. Like real basic things that would, down the road, prevent neglect and prevent stress within a family that can lead, unfortunately, tragically, to abuse. Prevention dollars are really critical. And so when I remember I asked that profound question, why does the CPS hotline in Arizona have so many more complaints and reports than the rest of the country? Well, one of the reasons could very well lead and tie into the fact that we cut our prevention dollars. Now that's not the sole reason, but it certainly is a factor. But the light bulb has not gone on yet in the governor's office with this issue, nor has it gone on with the majority of the Republican legislators. There are some key legislators in the Republican Party like Heather Carter, Representative Carter, Kate Brophy-McGee, Representative Brophy-McGee. They get it, and hopefully during the budget process, they will get some prevention monies back into the CPS budget. They also ask for adult protective services, huge growth in complaints of abuse of adults, elderly. Most of this increase was not in the physical abuse, but it was in financial abuse, ripping off of older people, their mortgage situations, loans, and so forth. And so they were asking for $5.2 million to hire investigators and caseworkers to help in that area. And then also the providers that the state contracts with for developmentally disabled, they had not had an increase in numerous years, and it's a very expensive service, and there's a concern that some of the providers won't be able to make it here in Arizona and would pull out, and then that would be a tragedy, a crisis. So they were trying to give them a 3% rate increase that would go into effect in July over what they got last year. They got a 3% also, but they're like 20-some% behind in the market. So that was the wish list there. Corrections wanted $60 million in new funds. to help operate new private prisons and some non-private prisons. Their management system is a disaster. I had to put this in because it's sarcasm, but you know, $60 million they asked for, 1% for substance abuse treatment services. Give me a break. Okay, that's their wish list.